Assassin's Creed Shadows release date is getting closer and closer as time passes, and it's filling me with some dread. Because I can already tell that once this game finally releases, it's going to be one of the biggest moments in the culture war, so to speak, in a long time. Everything about this game has been meticulously documented by the internet to borderline autistic detail. From the consultants who specialize in young boys loving older men, that's real by the way, not making that up unfortunately. Or how Ubisoft has been caught stealing art without consent and more. It's all a really big mess. I feel like I'm walking through actual doo-doo water every time I decide to dive back into the world of Ubisoft and their business when I make these videos. But today it's going to be even more bad news for Ubisoft and people who like Assassin's Creed. After spending somewhere in the ballpark of $300 million plus to make this game happen, now their own investors are turning on them, and the more you look into it, the worse it is. And after all this Ass Creed business, I also want to talk about some other devs that are still not willing to budge amidst the whole culture war to their own detriment. But first, from IGN, Ubisoft shareholder plots protest outside Paris headquarters, accuses company of failing to reveal discussions with Microsoft, Electronic Arts and others allegedly interested in acquiring intellectual properties. So, a stakeholder in Ubisoft is allegedly attempting to stage a boycott and threatening to sue the company for basically keeping investors out of the conversation when it comes to the future of the company in ways that will really matter, as you'll come to see. This boycott is being pushed by Juraj Krupa, the CEO of AJ Investments. As IGN states here, Juraj Krupa claimed that Ubisoft is horribly mismanaged by current management and wants a clear roadmap for recovery from the senior team to address declining shareholder value, lackluster operational execution, and failure to adapt effectively to market trends. One of the things that Krupa blasts Ubisoft for well before the Shadows nonsense was actually making partnerships with Saudi Arabian groups, notably Savvy Group when it came to DLC partnerships with one of their previous games, Assassin's Creed Mirage even. So Krupa is saying that Ubisoft has an alleged history, according to them, of not letting investors know what they're doing with the company, despite said investors, investing in the company in the first place. I think Krupa is right to feel this way. If I knew that I was giving thousands or millions of dollars to a group, and then they were just making decisions on what to do with my money and not letting me in on it, yeah, I think I'd be pretty pissed too. But this next part made me raise my eyebrow like The Rock, where they say this. The shareholder also pointed to a restricted article published by business investment platform Merger Market that alleged discussions between Microsoft, Electronic Arts, and others that are interested in acquiring IPs from Ubisoft. Management did not inform public about these steps further, Krupa claimed. Wait, hold on a second here. So you're telling me despite Shadows coming out, which the pro-Ubisoft people are telling me is definitely going to save the company and bring them back to prominence, that behind the scenes Ubisoft has been discussing selling off their IPs to other parties. Does this sound like a company that has a financial secure future to you guys? Why would Ubisoft be even entertaining the idea of selling off things like Rainbow Six, which by the way, their most profitable game of all time is Rainbow Six Siege, or Rayman, or Splinter Cell and more if they had a good feeling that Shadows would indeed save them? This just tells me that Shadows is not a last hurrah attempt to save Ubisoft, guys. If they're already having these discussions behind closed doors with cheeks and seats already, this means that they know, despite whatever Shadows ends up selling, that they're essentially cooked is what it means. You don't sell your bread and butter that keeps the sandwich together if you aren't to some capacity fully aware that you're cooked in some way going forward. Dude, this is so bad. Oh my god, man. Plus, hold up a second. Selling to Microsoft of all people? Hello? How many times has a company been sold to Microsoft and then the quality of their games and such go from decent or good to abysmal in record time? Almost all of them, to be exact. The only smart purchase on Microsoft's part was actually Activision. But that's only because according to Insider Gaming, at least as you can see here, Activision has attributed to about 85% of Xbox's sales since buying them, which kind of means that without Call of Duty under Microsoft's belt, their Xbox division was, making peanuts prior. But largely speaking, Microsoft doesn't really cultivate many of their studios, and they've been criticized aplenty for this too. So them now allegedly wanting to buy Splinter Cell and more? Yeah, not a good idea for those franchises, obviously. I mean, unless you just want future games in those series and more to all just be 6 or 5 out of 10 experiences that are shadows of their former selves, then sure, I guess. Anyway, following this AJ Investments attempting to push their boycott onto Ubisoft, Ubisoft ended up issuing a statement to IGN over this whole thing, which reads, "As we mentioned during our Q3 sales, the review of various transformational, strategic, and capitalistic options is ongoing. The board has established an ad hoc independent committee to oversee this formal and competitive process, so as to extract the best value from Ubisoft's assets and franchises for all stakeholders. Ubisoft will inform the market in accordance with applicable regulations if and once a transaction materializes." Oh my god, that's so many big words. It's all just corporate gobbledygook for everyone shut up while we try to ensure we get as much money as possible for our failing franchises, pretty much. I mean, come on guys, back in October 2024 even, Ubisoft entertained the idea of going private with Tencent buying them outright pretty much, and I'm telling you guys, this reality is becoming the outcome more and more with each passing day. Even though the family that owns Ubisoft since its inception, the Guillemot, or however you pronounce it, family, has been trying to stall Tencent from obtaining the company for a long time now. They even attempted to offer a deal where Tencent would get a majority stake in Ubisoft, but the Guillemot family would still be in charge of stuff like Assassin's Creed as an IP, which, yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. If Tencent ends up owning Ubisoft, there's no way they're going to allow the Guillemot family, or anyone for that matter, to just stick around and make any decisions for their future games, since Ubisoft has, for a long time now, been pushing what can only be described as pro-woke propaganda in many of their games, which coincidentally is why so many of those games have failed too. Why would Tencent want to keep the people in charge of the company they want to buy that, in their infinite wisdom, caused the very downfall of that company in the first place? It makes absolutely zero sense at all. But the Ubisoft boycott by this investment firm is not a good thing for Ubisoft so close to Shadow's release. This is not the time where Ubisoft should have to spend time, putting out fires, because they really need to focus on ensuring that Shadows is as big of a success as humanly possible at release. But the fact that they're going out of their way to leverage their IP to be sold while also trying to say that any boycott rumors are fake is the worst lie possible. Because you don't sell your best products from your control if your company has a future. I could see them maybe selling 1 or 2 IPs at best, but a fire sale on everything they own to all sorts of companies, especially Rainbow Six, this doesn't fill me with confidence that Ubisoft as a brand will be staying in the long run. Their best case scenario is that Tencent buys them completely but retains the name Ubisoft when pushing their games. But in my opinion, if Tencent does end up buying them, they will likely just erase that name from history. Because let's be honest, at this point, hearing the name Ubisoft coming attached with anything, there's a lot of baggage there, unfortunately. I mean, you have Twitter accounts like this one called Assassin's Creed News, where they're celebrating that Shadows is currently number 5 on the best-selling games for PS5. Wow, that must be great, right? Well, if you look at the actual numbers, it tells a different story. Here's the thing in case you don't know. In Japan, companies are legally obligated to publicly show exactly how many copies of any product gets sold in their markets. This is done on purpose to ensure that there's no swindling or fake news, so to speak, when it comes to reporting things. So if your game sold like ass, you can't just say, actually we're doing great. Maybe you can swindle that in the West or somewhere else, but in Japan, it's a no-go. Anyways, Shadows is number 5, right? Well, according to Bunbury Odo, who actually looked into the raw numbers of sales for each of these games presented here, it's a big difference. So, Monster Hunter Wilds is number 1 and has sold around 70,000 plus copies on PS5, in Japan I mean. That might not sound like a lot, but please remember that console games don't really sell like they do over here in the West, but 70k for your new game is a lot in Japan on one platform, mind you. But now here's the big huge dip. Second place here is Split Fiction, and it has sold just over 1,000 copies in Japan for PS5. As you can see, that's a massive drop from first to second place. So Shadows is in 5th, right? How many copies has it sold? A whopping 700 or so copies have been pre-ordered in Japan for Shadows as of the making of this video. So sure, when the game releases, it could become number 1, but the difference between 5 and 2 is a measly 300 units anyways. And I don't think 700 units sold in Japan is really going to save Ubisoft. That's just $49,000 in sale in Japan alone for Shadows. Well, without tax, of course, then it's over 50k in total, but that's abysmally bad considering that your game is kind of poised to portray that part of the world and its history, and the actual people who live there can't even seem to be bothered to pre-order your game over 1,000 times in their country. This is why it's important to actually look into things. Otherwise, this would look great on paper when in actuality, it's horrible. This AJ Investments that is planning this boycott of Ubisoft has blasted the company for declining profits, cratering stocks, and what they call outright lies from the company as a whole. Krupa, who runs AJ Investments, said in a statement that Ubisoft's lack of care for their IP and company has caused severe stock declines, which harmed mostly retail investors that have limited resources to manage their positions accordingly. Krupa also stated that, if their conclusion effectively enhances shareholder value, we will call off the demonstration. Otherwise, AJ Investments also declared it's ready to sue the company for misleading investors. So this boycott that AJ Investments is planning will run for a few months, it seems, and they are very pissed off with how Ubisoft is handling things. So best case scenario is that Shadows blows up, does amazing, saves Ubisoft, very unlikely, but a possibility. Or it doesn't do well enough at all. Like I said in my previous video, Shadows needs to sell at least 7 million copies to break even on game dev costs alone, which means that the game needs to be a Monster Hunter Wilds level release to not even make money technically out of the gate, but just make enough to give the investors back their money they invested pretty much over all those years. Then anything after that is technically profit. But the company is barely even worth $1 billion now, which yeah, is a lot of money, I know. But in the gamble of companies, it's a small fry compared to its competition. For an example, Sony PlayStation is worth well over 60 times what Ubisoft currently is. Case in point, that if even PlayStation is not unbreakable to the damages of activism and social change via hiring of activists and allowing their games to run amok in their walls, what hope do you truly believe that Ubisoft, of all people, would have when they've been cultivating this level of insanity for well over a decade now? Remember that Sweet Baby Inc. was not started out of nowhere. It was founded by 2 former Ubisoft developers that ended up splintering off and creating the consultant studio that now operates primarily out of Montreal, Quebec. The same place that Ubisoft has their main offices for the company. And I mean, Ubisoft has sadly become a massive supporter of things like Sweet Baby Inc. and that sort of stuff in gaming over the last few years, and I have no doubts that Sweet Baby to some degree worked on Shadows, but Ubisoft panicked and erased their names from involvement during the development. I also wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if we were to find out that well after the game has already come out, but it saddens me that people really do believe that Ubisoft can somehow turn this entire fiasco around into a win in the future. Like guys, you need to understand how deep the rot is within Ubisoft right now. When you have graduates coming into your company in droves to work there that have been legit raised on things like gender studies and such within how they make video games from the get-go, and now you're telling them 1 to maybe 5 years after they've been making games that the things they've come to know as fact are suddenly no longer valid at the company. These developers at places like Ubisoft have effectively, for lack of a better term, been groomed, so to speak, to make games that are, let's be real, destined to fail. But in their minds, these games don't fail because of their mindsets or their skills, because they're in echo chambers. They live and breathe and are constantly validated that the things that they know and say are true, because everyone is just as delusional as they are. And whether the entire group is wrong, if you get enough of them together in one place repeating one another, any lie can become a reality in that space. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's tons of devs who worked on Shadows that are perplexed by the outcome of how fans reacted to it, or any other game of Ubisoft's for that matter, because these things are made in a vacuum under veil. And by the time that it gets officially announced, these people have been submerged in these rhetorics and habits for years upon discovery. Again, the fact that these devs are hopefully coming to realize how cooked the company they work for is, that when it gets sold, it's not going to be sold to, say, another studio or publisher that enjoys pushing this sort of thing. The only way that that happens is if Microsoft somehow buys Ubisoft, which is unlikely, but Microsoft pushes that stuff too. So the activism, so to speak, could stay and keep going if that were to happen. But if Tencent buys them, Dude, China doesn't allow for feminine men or masculine women in their media, and I mean, that's a lot of what Ubisoft pushes nowadays. Especially the masculine female archetype, it's all over all of their franchises. Just go pick one, it's everywhere. Personally, if anyone is going to fix Ubisoft's franchises, it can't really be Ubisoft themselves anymore, because they are just lost at this point. And like I showed you, the fact that they're having discussions of selling off IP and not telling their investors about it beforehand, are you kidding me? Anyone who invests would tell you how big of a no-no that is. Again, need I repeat myself? The actions of Ubisoft here amidst this looming boycott and potential lawsuits are not the actions of a healthy company that has its ascendancy in its sights. These are the actions of a company that knows that its time is limited. And the executives here are just trying to fill their pockets as much as they can with anything they can get rid of, so that once the building does go into flames, they can just escape and jump off with their golden parachutes and live their lives in luxury. And at that point, what the industry will be left with is a sea of unemployed developers that are raised in a dying agenda. They can't really fathom why any of this happened in the first place, when all they were doing was acting in their nature the whole time as they were taught to. And when it comes to Ubisoft, there is no real position to be making demands of anybody, and speaking of demands, let's use BattleTech as a more recent example. So to give you more examples of how these things can go so poorly, so BattleTech is like Warhammer, kind of, but somehow even more pandering when it comes to identity stuff in that space. Well, they recently claimed that their failure in sales and such to not be their own fault. Instead, it's Trump's and the tariffs. Yes, I'm being serious. BattleTech is ran and operated by Catalyst Game Labs. And here's what they said on their own website. Like many of you, the Catalyst Game Labs team has been watching recent economic developments. We have been hard at work developing strategies that would make our position more resilient to the rapidly changing world trade dynamics that we have been seeing. Like much of the tabletop gaming industry, Catalyst gets hit especially hard by trade tariffs. Our industry is inherently international in nature. We are lucky that we've been able to be flexible with pricing in the past decade. However, recent changes with the market have shown us that our flexibility was not quite prepared for a change of this magnitude. With the current level of economic uncertainty, we have to make some tough decisions. In the next 60 days, we will be releasing a comprehensive update for this process, including some unfortunately necessary price adjustments. These price adjustments will be applied to new products and product reprints that are directly affected by tariffs. As we adjust to this new situation, we will likely expand this policy across our entire product line in order to average out increases. We are working hard to ensure that we can keep or even improve our value contribution to you and your game tables. We have prided ourselves on maintaining our relationship with you and your local game stores through Catalyst Game Labs history, and we will hope to continue that trend in the years to come. The CGL team would like to thank you for sticking around, blah blah blah, and you get the point. Catalyst and BattleTech are in the dumps financially pretty much right now. But it doesn't surprise me because, like Ubisoft, they alienated their core fan base for a massive push towards leftist LGBTQ+ people instead. As seen here back in 2022 from Bounding Into Comics, BattleTech writer and New York Times bestselling author Blaine Pardoe canceled by publisher over false claims made by online stalker. So the former lead writer for BattleTech got fired and canceled by someone who was stalking him online. And get this, the stalker, they ended up replacing him at BattleTech in the writing department, and no, I'm not kidding. In an open letter that Pardoe sent, one part reads, "When corporate cowardice in the face of a minority of left-wing woke whiners alienates conservative fans, the fans need to speak with their money and remind publishers who they really answer to." And he further states, "After 37 years of writing for this series, I found myself cancelled for voicing my conservative beliefs. Why I'm bringing this up in a video that is primarily about Ubisoft is simple. I want to convey to you how it doesn't matter what your product is. Whether it's assassins or mechanized warriors, nothing is immune to the identity political virus if you let these types in. And now with these tariffs, BattleTech is cooked. They will become overpriced while still hating anyone who doesn't agree with them politically if they want to engage with their make-believe world." Even another game dev which made a game called Sandwich attacked people like Grums, so Grums got into a public spat with Ubisoft. And here's what Sandwich's devs had to say about it. "Thank you, Assassin's Creed social media person. I'm proud of you. F that fastish piece of shit." Grums would then respond with this. "I thought this indie game was well made, Caravan Sandwich, but randomly out of the blue, the devs decided to name drop me for clout to own the chuds. I never mentioned the game. I think indie games that want to be woke should do so, but instead they decided to pick a fight. Turns out they are trying to make it so that modders can't mod out pride flags and are making it political in their tweets and marketing and trying to insult everyone at the same time. It's too bad, cute game, but the devs have massive brain rot. Don't buy games from devs that hate you. Look, the point of all of this is that when you shove activism into your games, it doesn't work 99% of the time. These devs, whether it's these sandwich devs or the Battletech people or just Ubisoft in general, they pushed activism before profits and they are now reaping the whirlwind in return. None of this was being done for the right reasons, except that the activists believed that they could get away with all of it. Of course, Ubisoft is far larger than either of these examples, but the point still stands. If even one of the big mighty game publishers can fall due to opening their gates to morons who don't care about video games, is there really any hope for these smaller dev studios? And the fact that Ubisoft's own investors are so fed up that they've reached a point where they want to tear down the company is proof alone that this way of doing things, it just cannot last. So if you're an investor of Ubisoft, I hope whatever Tencent buys them that you get your money's worth. But as for Assassin's Creed Shadows, Ubisoft is teetering on the brink of collapse right now, and it's no one's fault but their own. Thank you for watching, subscribe, have a great day everyone.